We know the tubes and things are pretty awful as well. So just to let you know, we are recording it. So hence why we've got these microphones, because otherwise it's much nicer when we're just talking, but without microphones. But because of that, we're taking the opportunity to record it. So, welcome. I think I've chatted to some of you. My name is Victoria Wanton, and we have a series. We've had a series of tech dialogues over the last 3 years, but this is our first in person because we started in COVID, and we sort of carried on because we're UK wide, but we also wanted to bring everyone as a community together. So, hence our first one. So, I'd like to just thank Hawkins Brown for giving us this space tonight, and we look forward to other times and other architects' practices and others to come and engage with us through our tech dialogues. So, to say tonight, I'm just going to take that over. I think it's just not moving. So, Gaia, sorry, Gaia has been organising it, and Navi, who's our researcher and coordinator, and it's been putting together the presentation. So I can do it now. Fine. Okay. So quickly going through, because I think the real key thing is having speakers tonight to talk about the subject of urban young urban planners. But this is just really the sort of purpose of TED. We don't organise projects and actively engage with children and young people. Myself, I have over the years, but what I felt was that we needed to actually build the capacity of more people doing this, and also create examples that the others can take forward and use as reference. So our role is like a platform for engaging children and young people through yourselves and others who are actually doing those projects. And then we're using that information as sort of case studies to help others. So this is really, of course, the fundamental questions which you can all see there. And I think everybody recognizes those. If we didn't have to put those up, it's because it's become normal. But at the moment, it's still not normal. And our approach, as I said, we actually try to build that capacity, education, and built environment professionals. So just recently doing something with the academics, doing a survey of the students' role in academia of engaging them with outreach programs for children and young people. And that's, by the way, is online. Celebrate and share excellence and practices, which we do through our awards. And this will be our 5th year coming up. And then conduct research to evaluate the sector, because unless we build this up, we can't find the evidence to do this or show the evidence of the importance of it. So actually that research to evaluate the sector is really important for us. And then facilitate collaborations across the built environment. So it's really saying everybody within the built environment. So what next? Well, if you're working on relevant projects, you think that they will be of interest to us and to showcase, let us know. We're also doing the launch of the Inspire Future Generation Awards, which I said is in 5 years, and there's some in the room who've had received the awards, and that is because they've done such incredible work. So how to get more involved, become friends, supporters, support the awards scheme, volunteer. Thank you for our volunteers tonight, Eden and Sophie here, and just follow us to build our sort of network, our family as we call it. So tonight we have 3 speakers. Christina Ergler from New Zealand, so welcome. Julia King, who's Director of Social Place, and she'll be talking more about her work. And I think you find the idea of having ways of looking at it, assessing, having a kind of not modular but way of creating a system in a way that therefore you could use. And they go from Hawkins Brown, who's partner in education sector lead. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So first of all, I'm going to invite Christina Ergler. We will have 3 presentations and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So just think about a question. Is there something really burning after a speaker? Just put your hand up or shout it out. At the end, we want a Q&A and learn from you as well as what they've said, what you kind of might question it or query it or want to know much more about it. So over to Christina. So welcome. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the very warm welcome, and it's really exciting to see one of my former students in the audience who came to support and listen. So I'm really excited to be here and sharing with you about city making through the eyes of preschoolers in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So have you ever thought about how a city feels like when you're 3 or 4 feet tall? When the world is navigated through movement, through touch, through emotions and imaginations. Have you ever thought about how little children actually envision their city? In this presentation, I invite you to see the city as young children do. But before I share the powerful insights, I'll briefly introduce why we actually started to engage with under 5-year-olds, what methods we have used to elicit their experiences and their visions, but also what we learned from them about more sustainable, inclusive and livable cities. And then I close with a short reflection. So what we know is our urban environments becoming more urban, more people moving into cities, and already more than half of the world's children reside in urban environments. But when we look at academic studies, the majority of them engage with primary school children and teenagers. So we have already a reasonably good understanding about what they like in cities, how the cities should better work for them. But we don't know where young children under 5 go, what places they like, what they do, what affordances of their environments speak to them. The few studies that exist around urban experiences with with preschool age children are coming mainly out of the educational sector. And from these studies, we gain information that they're actually already listening to the urban environment. They learn from and connect socially and physically with these environments. One of the reasons probably why so few people engage with that age group is there are such common misconceptions that they're really hard to work with. They don't write stuff down. They don't talk as much. Their answers are often quite short. But also that they lack that general competency to think more broadly about the urban environment. So they have nothing valuable to contribute. And so with these studies that we do, as we want to rectify it and really share and show their conceptualizations of the city, which is way more than what we often give them credit to. And so we work with the premises that even young children are experts on their own life. And we need to really understand what is valuable for them. We need to work with them and see the world through their eyes. Our premises is that they have rights in cities. They have the right to experience and use cities as much as anybody else in the city. But they also have the right to shape cities, to participate in decision-making practices. And so the study I'm talking about particularly was interested in finding out what methods can we use to elicit their visions, their experiences, and their use of the cities how does their use and experiences look like? And what can we learn from them to create more healthy, inclusive, and sustainable urban futures? We worked in 2 cities with about 80 children. They were 3 to 5 year old in Wellington and in Dunedin. Dunedin is a city where I work. It has about 120,000 inhabitants. It's quite a white city. It's a very hilly city, and people mainly move around by car. In contrast, Wellington, as you might know, is the capital of New Zealand. It's a way more complex urban environment. It's a more diverse environment with about 30% of all the residents being born overseas. It's similarly hilly to Dunedin, but the transport system is way more diverse and complex. So they have trains, they have buses, people move around on bikes, but still the car dominates the movement around the city. In both cities, most of the children we worked with grew up in suburban housing. Some of them in apartments, but dominantly it's a detached house with a garden. These suburbs are often served by public spaces and parks, playgrounds, and other service facilities. So theoretically, if you like the quality of these amenities, you could kind of walk or bike to these if it's not too hilly. So what did we do to work with the children? So first of all, we went into the kindergartens and just played with the children so that we weren't kind of foreigners or aliens with them, and they got used to us. Then we invited everyone who was interested to just share with us what they do in their city, what they did on the weekend, what they notice, what they enjoy. And these mat discussions are just a starter for them to think about their use and their experiences in these cities. And that's built on previous experience working with older children, that sometimes people actually need time to think and engage with topics. And then after that discussions, a few days later, we came back and invited individual children, for we had consent to participate in the study, to build cities with us or for us. We brought a big carpet tile. We had laminated tiles with a Velcro dot on the back, and so when they could place it on the city, they could move it, but when they would walk across the city, it wouldn't be kind of torn off and changed. These city building activities took anything between 10 minutes to the longest was 2 days. And what really impressed us was the dedication of the children. They had a clear idea what they wanted in their city, but also when their city was finished. And they had to tell us what they needed in their city. And that's coming out of when you work with children, you're often accused that you provide them with everything and they just place stuff down, set us in the box. And to avoid that, we on purpose asked them to tell us what they need for the city. When we started to notice that things were slowing down a little bit, we invited them to look into our boxes. And what was fascinating is that either they didn't need anything because the city was finished, or they just placed a few tiles in addition to their city. But it wasn't clearly using all the spaces. So for us, it indicated they had a really clear vision about what belongs in their city, what they wanted and what they needed for their city. And then we invited, or we gave them a camera, and they were asked to take photos and any things that they like and don't like about their city. They took that on the weekends and weekend days, and then afterwards they came back and decided which of the photos they wanted to talk us through. We also did a survey with parents just to get some background information about the family situations and their context and where they would go and what they would do with their children. So that's based on our philosophy and understanding that there's no biological truth to suggest that being young equates with having nothing to say. We just believe we need to find the right methods for different age groups to really share their experiences and their thoughts. This is a little bit examples about the diversity of designs that we got, the diversity and creativity of how the children built their cities. Some use storytelling, some others focus more around patterns and functions of cities. And so what we got is some cities who had clear nature-based features, others had more transport features. And one of my favorite ones was one of the children built a suburb without any cars because he was wishing for being able to move more independently without adult supervision. But I think what unites all these different designs is a clear sense of complexity and organizations. The designs reflect both real urban patterns like playgrounds and parks in suburbs, houses lining streets, or airports being located at the edge of cities. And then looking across all these different designs, children understood that cities actually need a mix of elements to function. Even the most minimalist city not only had transport or education, but a variety of different functions and services included, but also people of different genders and ages. What stands out for us is that children not only thought about their needs, so normally you would assume they want playgrounds, they want their kindergarten and their home, and that's it. But this clearly showed they think way more broadly about how a city functions or what other people need. One of my favorite quotes is one puts home a coffee shop because his grandparents love coffees. And I think that's just an example around empathy and thinking what they do. So children are not just dreaming up their cities. They are reflecting on what makes them work in their eyes, what makes them livable for all ages and not just themselves. Their designs show empathy, imagination, and sophisticated awareness of how urban environments serve communities. So to give you a little bit of an example, I'll show you 3 different designs. This is Rosie's design. She grew up in Wellington and built up her city around transport. There is the train station, the road connects the airport, it connects playgrounds. She was thinking about safety by placing lights and traffic lights and zebra crossings into her city. But she also thought about what people needed to move around, from buses to trains to actually petrol stations to make the cars go around. She also thought about what her sister needs, who has an electric car, to be able to charge and move around in the city. She also thought about how enjoyable is it moving between A and B. And you might see the line of trees that's lined with grass as well. And to make it enjoyable, she put birds into these trees. And so Rosie's city connected people and places. She focused on accessibility and safety, but also around enjoyable movement. Another example is Mason's city from Dunedin. He built his entire city around the core services, from police stations, because we need to put baddies into prisons. We need fire brigade because they're putting out fire. They're helping us when we're having power shutdowns. We need healthcare services because people get sick of any age. What was fascinating was also City thought not only about these occasional events that could happen, but the kind of more weekly events when we need the rubbish truck to come by. And so because we didn't bring rubbish bins, he drew rubbish bins that we could place in front of the houses. In Mason City demonstrates his view on how urban services work together to support everyone to live there, to have a clean, healthy and safe city. Curry's example is quite different, and he mainly envisioned a livable city, and he started putting down houses, and then he told us what needs to go into the houses, from washing machines to toys to laptops, so that people can work from home. But he also thought about what makes it pleasurable, so putting down colourful flowers because his mum loves flowers. He ensured there were trees in the cities because we need trees to live and be able to breathe. And so when we think about his city of a livable cities, it was connected to elements and ensure that humans and non-humans thrive in cities. Cities that are safe, healthy and happy. Cities are full of natural life, so you might see there are fishes and cats as well. And they are not just decoration, but because he wanted and talked about the interdependency of different life forms. And I think that's something you often don't give them credit for, about thinking around these complexities and how everything works together. To kind of move on and sharing a little bit about the photos, and that's a map about our hotspot photos. The different colours are basically how we coded the photos, from public space to shops, streets, transport related aspects. What you should take away from that slide is that the young children use the entire city. They not just focus on education, the home and playgrounds. They engage with diverse institutions and services. They look at social, cultural and natural spaces. And that demonstrates their breadth of engagement with our urban spaces. Children travel to these spaces with relatives, friends, and siblings, mainly by car in the New Zealand context. So let's look a little bit into the stories behind their photos. And I wanted to share kind of two dominant themes around family, the home, and meaningful moments. So a lot of the moments were some outstanding experiences, like in Rosie's example, for the first time she walked across that beam by herself without support of her older sister, or kind of the excitement about feeding chickens at your grandparents' farm, or seeing a car with what the child called a snorkel on the road and finding them and looking for them, walking through it. But we also got a lot of these everyday moments. In the top photo, walking to go shopping with your family, helping your dad do maintenance around the house, having breakfast with your families, the importance of toys and the home to feel a sense of belonging. And what they gave us insights through these photos is actually these mundane, quiet, but it's still powerful moments that shape how they experience the world. Another biggest theme was around nature, leisure, and play. And so we have a lot of photos where they're out in nature, where they're playing, where they're riding their bikes, but also how they use spaces and statues that not really meant for children to be used, like the vow sign for an exhibition, but just using the affordances that are put in front of them. So they remind us that outdoor spaces are not just places to play. They were places where children could learn about the world, about the limits and about their own role in caring for it. So if you talked about signs that said don't play in the botanical gardens in the bushes because you can hurt the plants, and kids were talking about kind of the contradictions about wanting to play in the bushes but also knowing that it would harm the plants. Or another one talked about rubbish that they saw that could harm animals and kind of nature. And so there was a lot of caring and thinking in their role in contributing to the environments. So to conclude, what we saw in our study is young children are really active citizens and have meaningful urban insights. They understand cities way better and in a way more complex ways than we often give them credit for. They prioritize intergenerational connections, green spaces, but also accessible transport to move around. Their vision encompasses inclusion, belonging, and community diversity. And so, all in all, these findings reinforce for us the ideas that urban planning must be grounded in principles of social and environmental justice, because a truly inclusive city is one where every resident, regardless of age or ability, has access to safe, welcoming, and vibrant intergenerational spaces. And so we think by integrating young children's perspectives in urban planning, we can work towards cities that are not only livable, but more equitable, fostering resilient sustainability and a collective sense of community.
Many thanks, Christina. I think using the methodology, coming from a university, you have that opportunity to actually work through it. So many projects, we all know, we do the projects and then we can't evaluate it, we can't see the longevity of it. So these types of programs are really quite important to reinforce perhaps what we know, but also to give us some new ideas of how we can integrate it into our whole projects and the whole planning of cities. So going on to the next one, Julia. King's Director of Social Place, but I will also say has come from a university background as well. So we talk about methodology. So tonight we have two examples in a way of that kind of thinking coming through. So Julia, come say a few words.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed that, Christina. And hello, everyone. And Victoria, thank you so much. I think it's just really, it's an honor to be actually part of this, because I think the awards do a lot to kind of amplify the work that we're all doing and make it, I think, try and mainstream it. So, yeah, and I did want to, I've titled my talk Unlearning, and hopefully you'll, when I finish, you'll understand why. I did want to give a little background to myself and how I ended up here. I started work at a structural engineering firm called Atelier One, but life had other plans for me. And because it's never too early for a midlife crisis, I left traditional practice quite early. And I ended up spending a decade designing and researching sanitation systems, largely firstly as a PhD student and then at the London School of Economics, which I was an academic for a couple of years. And so I spent this, there's a photograph of me in India, and I did for all my sins spend a decade at the LSE, and it was at the LSE where I started to coalesce a lot of my thinking around working with young people, not just because they're the custodians of the future, but because they largely made me feel happy and better about the world that we live in. And so here I am advocating for young people at the Labour Party conference in the top hand corner, and at COP28 talking with the mayor of Bogota. And I'm actually going to refer back to the work that she did. And I think I wanted to mention the sanitation because there is a kind of umbrella concern with my work. And it's this idea that when change happens at you and not with you, it's one of the most disempowering things that you can experience. And I think us as built environment professionals, we not only have a duty, a kind of an ethical duty, but actually it makes us better at whatever profession we're doing, whether it's engineer or an architect or a landscape architect. And so in the beginning of last year, myself and Olivia, who's the other half of Social Place, we both left the LSE to shift it away from the research, which I really enjoyed, but because we wanted this challenge of going into practice. And so we set up Social Place as a company dedicated to devising tools and processes that enable more diverse group of people to contribute to design and planning. And a lot of that has ended up working with young people, and specifically young women. And here's a group, and I'm going to come back to them in the Lancaster West Estate, who are actually doing a podcast after having done the project for the LSE. And I'm kind of responding to this question in this talk of how to capture young people's concerns to inform kind of architecture, design, planning, and so on. And I think echoing Christina, for me, this is the barrier is a methodological one. Like, young people are often called like hard to reach. They're not hard to reach. I actually don't struggle to recruit at all. It's hard to reach if you're using the sort of same old approaches. And if someone offered you and said, do you want to talk about a building site this Saturday in the middle of the day for no money and maybe a crappy cup of drink, would you go? No. So why do we expect people to do that? They're hard to reach because it's a bad offer. And so, but I think it's really important to say, I have to say this, there is no one way to do this, and you've already seen another way, but I am going to talk about a way today. And for us, it's been this idea of peer research. And I think in many ways, that's what you've already seen is a form of it. But for us, peer research, there's a huge body of academic work, and it's this idea that it recognizes that individuals with any community being researched are themselves, even if they're children, competent agents capable of participating in research in a variety of levels, including as researchers. And we extend that to design. And so, we sometimes call our peer researchers, like an ambassadorship or community researchers, but they're all effectively the same term. And it's this idea of working with local residents and at the heart of a project. And we do other things, obviously, at Social Place, but I would say that this way of working is my preferred way of working. And I also think for myself and everyone involved, professionally, and the wider design team, it's so rewarding. So to date, we've worked in about 10 locations, over 12 projects, and hired over 60 young people. And I'm currently right now working with an intergenerational group of people identifying as women or non-binary from the ages of 17 to 63 for this former Holloway prison site, which is an interesting new addition, doing something with that kind of age range. And this idea of working is really set against, I guess, mainstream practice or kind of traditional engagement. And what I mean by that are like interviews or surveys or one-off focus groups. And according to the Young Foundation, 75% of research methods used with young people are those methods. And I think it's really important to say that traditional survey and interview can do hugely important work. I'm a big fan of it. But I want to argue today that to work with young people, and I'm largely going to draw on the work that I've done with young women, that their experiences are complex and multi-layered. And because of that, we need to rethink alternative ways to actually bring this demographic into view. Because traditional methods are great for understanding basic use patterns, but limited to making social and spatial analysis, leading towards implementing meaningful change. And for the architects in the group, what I mean by meaningful change is our built environment. And so unless you go deeper, I think you really risk distorting your understanding of a place. This is a classic example. I mean, I get variants of this all the time, everywhere I work. So, for example, if you were to start out, I'll do it in the room. Does everyone feel safe? This is probably not the demographic to do. I'm going to come back to my script and not go off script. So if you say to a group of young women, like from year 9, and say like, oh, do you feel safe? Most of them be like, yeah. And like one of them might come back and be like, no, blah, 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 who's the sort of academic in the room who wants to really give me a hard time. But what you notice is that if you follow up and have conversations over time, the answers are far more nuanced. And you'll hear stories of like, yes, I feel safe because I take a longer route around the park. Or yes, I feel safe because I don't go out at all. Or yes, I feel safe because I hang out in the next is a clothing brand for teens. I hang out in the next clothing room. In academia, we call this safety work. And it's work that women, largely women, do all the time to make themselves feel safer. And so this exercise sort of reveals that if you were to just, if you just to come in to do a survey, you're not going to pick up on this stuff. And when you have time, I think, which is what Christina said, all of a sudden you get all this kind of amazing detail. And I think this is because a lot of behaviors around things like safety and mobility and occupation are normalized from a really young age. So we argue in our work that first you need to do a process of unlearning, or the process of learning new and questioning existing knowledge. And this is a way to explore the banality of our lives, sort of like benches and the role that those have in our lives, but also more complex things like feelings of sexualization, of like a young woman's experience, or safety. And so another example that I found in my work is, and this was a really early workshop that I ran, and we were doing a one-off engagement activity. And although there was care in this activity, and we did try to ask nuanced questions, there wasn't space and time for this kind of learning or unlearning. And so at the end, when we asked this group of teens to design a teen space or a space for them, this is an image of this kind of work in progress. So I went up to the young woman who was working on this, and I said, oh, who'd located this kind of, does everyone know the term Muga, these multi-use games area, basketball court, basket football cages in London. And she located this cage in the middle. And I said, oh, are you into basketball? And she's like, no. And I was like, well, why have you started with the basketball court? And she's like, well, you said design a teen space, and that's a teen space. And so it was a really learning, and actually it's echoed by other people who I've met who work in this discipline, that the Muga is such this ubiquitous teen space that it kind of occupies all their imagination. And so we kind of do this thing of unlearning, and well, this is, you can't see, but what you can see, this is a sort of a mirror board. It's an online board. Sorry, I think the image is a bit skewed. It's an online board where we do this process of learning and unlearning. And what you cannot see are a series of like learning units. So we prepare content such as videos. These videos can be things like exploring safety through a feminist lens, or mapping as an evidence, as mapping as a radical feminist practice, all the way through to readings that we find from around the world, case studies from around the world, and activities for people to do in their own time. And also this holds all the conversations that we do together in person and or online. And if I can zoom in, for example, on the left-hand side, you can see these were like 3 readings that we asked this group in Clapham to do. And then we have come together and we're like, right, let's talk about it. And we document it on Miro. And then this is zooming in on one young woman in Clapham uploading her photographs of a park and reflecting on the different experiences that she has day and night. And this is an example of content. So like when we set up, this is like 3 videos. One of them was by the architects explaining the brief. One was by us explaining more about the project. Another one was just, this is about Holloway Prison. We're working on the redevelopment of that. And so I found a video online of Holloway Prison, which is actually an amazing, I'm not going to go there. And so, yeah, you're getting a sense of what the Miro board looks like. And then when we get these women to go out and photograph their lives, and then they do comments, and then we come together and then talk about them. And it's just this really rich tapestry of stuff. And a lot of it's really banal. It's like drop curves, but architects love conversations around drop curves. So what am I showing here is that our method is underpinned. So by kind of 4 modes. One is this curriculum, this learning and working experience. But the curriculum is always bespoke, because the challenges faced in Crewe and the challenges faced in Clapham are hugely different. So the curriculum is always adjusting. And it adjusts in real time too, because sometimes things come up. So like right now in the Holloway Park project, bins is becoming a really important thing. So I'm making a video on bins at some point before I go on holiday. And there's a lot of touch time in person and online. And that's because we see the discussion as the research, we see discussion as the work. And it's a way of valuing that tacit knowledge, that kind of everyday experience that you have, and really celebrating it and saying, I care about your actual experience of something. And then you put that into conversation with planning and policy and design guidance. And we do this by, we hire people, and it allows us, and in the hiring process, it allows for independent study, which they are paid for. So every single hour, every single moment spent on the project is paid for. And so often the kind of independent research is coupled with a film. And then there's also, like, we rely heavily on mapping as a tool of analysis, but also as a way of claiming space. And so whilst projects are different, they always have these four modes at play. And so for us, this thing of unlearning is so important, because we think that particularly some of the young women we've come across have internalized this belief that they shouldn't have spaces for them, even though they recognize that young men do in the form of a muga. And I do want to just a little off-piste comment. I think mugas are amazing because of that, because I was just speaking to a police officer this week around complaints around young people. And I asked the police officer, I said, do you get complaints about teens in mugas? And she's like, no. And I think that's because everyone, teenagers and adults, acknowledge that that is a space for them. So they're totally allowed to be there. But 93% of users of mugas are boys. And actually, boys don't even like them either if you start surveying them. So we're rolling out this provision, which is just not kind of loved and pretty expensive. But I keep on thinking, and I don't even have the answer necessarily for it, of what's a teen space that isn't a muga, that no one's going to call the police about, where teens can hang out and just do their thing. So that little tangent coming back in. So when you tell teens and actually say to them that, in fact, there are accountabilities towards them for safe and placeable spaces, this is really empowering. And then they can begin to make suggestions and changes. Like, I've genuinely had young women say, when I say, do you think we have a responsibility to use them? No, we do. And it's actually legislated. So this is a report from one of our paid programs. We're working with a group of young women from the Lancaster West Estate. That's where the Grenfell Tower is. Grenfell Tower is ring fenced for a separate process. And working with TM, and I'm really glad I've got Lizzie from the architect side, well, landscape architects, who was effectively the client. And it's really interesting. They hired us, not their client. So the landscape architects actually hired us for this. And our report, because so much of the actual information that they gave that informed the designs, that's held with the design team. So when it came to writing the report, we were like, what are we going to do? So we ended up putting this graphic novel together, which is really celebrating their voices in literally their language. And here, here you can see them reflecting on things like safety and identity, and community spaces. And I just want to zoom into this comment. So one of them said, all our benches are being removed. It's like when something bad happens or they think something will happen, they take them away. I want to be really clear, they is the local authority, if you're unclear. And it's just wrong place, wrong time, but it's like they're punishing all of us. And the metal benches they left feel like they're intentionally uncomfortable so people won't sit there. They are right. They are intentionally uncomfortable so that people won't sit there. And this was one of the sites that we were considering and where they had made this, where we were having this conversation. And it's currently a car park. And when we sat with Lizzie, and we were Lizzie showed us the options, and we went through everything from like technical things like there's a flood risk zone here, so you need to really consider planting. And there's some real technical issues. And it was then we had conversations around seating and so on. And it was during this moment that one young woman said, it's really tragic that a boy was shot in Verity Close. I want the estate to be a space where you'd be surprised that someone should get shot here. This is a really powerful statement, and it sets the scene now for a conflict of evidence, because this comment reveals that there had been a shooting here. And when local residents previously had been surveyed about their desires for that space, and when they were asked about seating, the local residents had a resounding, we don't want seating in this car park, in what is this car park. And this speaks to the challenges of consultation where you have conflicting interests. because I totally get it that if you survey a group of residents and there's been a shooting and you say, do you want benches? They're just going to go, no, I absolutely do not want. But no one had shown those residents, like what we had been privileged to see, of these options for transforming this car park into something else. And I say this because visualizing such a radically different future, and I think, yeah, it's, you know, transforming this car park to anything other than that for anybody is not easy. And I think for me, this thing of how difficult it is to imagine an alternative future is really captured by, I was speaking to a youth worker in Wandsworth last year, and she said to me, sometimes young people don't know when you ask them, what do you want? Because they need support to imagine beyond what they're experiencing in the moment. And when we fantasize, we actually often just imagine an improved version of our current reality. And this is something I really try to overcome with our program for myself and the participants, because I think we believe that to imagine beyond that future of the degree to which it already exists is the most powerful thing we can do as designers. So, for example, imagine a non-sexist city. Wow. Or even, you know, maybe left lofty, a kind of a space for teens beyond the Muga. Wow. And in doing so, we can then overcome contemporary sexism. And in reshaping tomorrow's public realm, we're actually reshaping ourselves today. I really do think that. So how do we do this? I'm now going to explore this, how we explore the banality of things like benches and the complexity of things like sexualization and safety. And so we've stolen this method of from transport planners, and it's called trip chaining. And trip chaining is a method of recording consecutive journeys with linked purposes. And so like a traditional work pattern is like, yeah, go from my apartment to work and so on. And the example below is someone who performs care work, often unpaid care work. And this is gendered. And this trip chaining and how the decision making around how we do our transport systems comes from data sets. This is a typical data set that would inform transport systems. This is really great research by an academic in Madrid. And what you can see here and what a transport planner would be like, yeah, 30% of trips are for employment. So when you have this data set, this transport system, which actually looks like this, makes total sense because you're like, most people coming on public transport are doing so for paid formal work in the city. So we move them like this. But if you look at your data differently, and for example, and you categorize differently, and if you categorized care, often unpaid, it looks very different. And care work, there's as many people using public transport for care work as there is for employment. And when you have that lens, you can then all of a sudden start to advocate for radial transport routes, for example, that favor care workers who do multiple trips in local areas, who the current transport system does nothing for them. And again, now I'm bringing you back to Bogota and the mayor of Bogota, who knew that there was a deep inequality in the city of Bogota. I'm from Venezuela, so I feel this, where 30% of females who perform unpaid care work, 90% of those are from low-income families, and 76% of those who perform unpaid care have no education beyond primary school. So in Bogota, they've come up with this amazing idea of care blocks. And care blocks are effectively for anyone who performs any form of function of care to regain that time, whether that be industrial cleaning, so they can do their laundry quickly, but also to do training. So there's a free crash, so you can then get that education that you didn't get. And actually the whole thing is also then informing Bogota's transport system. It's freaking amazing. So what we do, and for me, the trip chain is both a method by which to talk to people and a thing to explain all this sexism that's hidden in the way our cities are built. So it performs this double function of being a tool for educating the problem and then being a tool to talking about them. So yeah, we ask them to trip chain and what the trip chaining, I get them to do this sort of simple, like your typical working day and a typical leisure day, really simple circles and lines. And then we say, make one circle and one line better. What would you do? And they can be structural things like a maintenance regime. It can be caregiver, like a stewardship role. It can be a design intervention. We really prod this kind of expansive take on an intervention. And this is a kind of an example. It's actually my favorite. We have loads, but this is my favorite because of its simplicity. This is a young woman, a 16-year-old who lives in Clapham. This is her trip chain. She goes to Starbucks. And in interrogating her trip chain on her way back home, she sits on this ledge, and what you cannot see in that photograph that she has taken is that her brother is out of sight playing in a playground. Now, she is too old to pass off as a mother, and she's too old to go in because she's 16, and she is too young to pass as a mother. So she sits on this little ledge there, and her intervention was an arm rest. And I love it. And I love it because I think it's showing a young woman claiming her space in this big bad city, but also it's evidencing the kind of interventions that we need to be attuned to design young women like Aya into our city. And so I'm worried I'm running out of time. I just want to very quickly say that I think there is a problem around the fear of violence that women have. And when they don't see architectures for them, that reinforces this fear. And it creates a perpetual negative loop of not wanting to go out into public. I have a whole shtick on this, but I can, if anyone's interested, on my paradoxical thing, email me and I will send you a report. So just to kind of conclude, so that was sort of, I was meant to do a bit of a feministy rant there, but I'm not going to do this. I just want to end on why we have found our method so important. So firstly is that we're recognizing this as labor. So everyone's paid a living wage. The second thing is that the curriculum allows us to engage with systemic large-scale issues like women's safety and themes like gentrification, but always attuned to that local condition. And because we structure the work as flexible and intuitive, it's really respectful to these barriers to participation. So for example, like we often have to work out of traditional working hours because you're working with people who are in employment or working. But also sometimes you have to pay for childcare because if you're working with someone who has 3 kids. And young people often are actually really busy and lead far busier lives than me and my dogs do. So it's just being very, very reflective and flexible. It's critical. And then the last 2 points, we're constantly kind of reflecting on what we're doing and how we're doing it, and giving our participants time to kind of revisit ideas and assumptions. We will often circle back to an idea, and that's why the mirror is so important, to log an early thought and have that ability to come back to it. And finally, yes, we get really good stuff out of them, but they get a job. And of every single cohort I have also been someone's first, what's it when you recommend someone on their CV, when they go for a job, my brain is not firing. A referee, that's it. So, and that gives me great joy. And so, yeah, if you found this interesting, I've written a whole academic paper about this. And thank you.
Oh, thanks. Again, inspiring. And I think the unlearning, is the real key thing here. We had the Learning Connections webinar a week ago, and Rosie Parnell from Newcastle was really talking about unlearning, letting yourself go and hear from everything rather than just assuming that your way or is the only way to go forward. So it's really that unlearning to actually, I think it's about, I was going to say, when someone says, just lean back, fall back, and I will catch you. And you have to trust them to let us catch you. And I think it's a sort of that kind of unlearning comes with it as well. So lots of food for thought. So very much. Thanks, Julia. So next one and last is Nega, Partner of Education Sector Lead at Hawkins Brown. And this is really looking at I would say urban environment within a place, but it's not a building. It is an environment as such. So I'd like to come forward to Nega. Thanks.
Super, thank you. That was amazing to have both speakers. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here and welcome you to the studio. I'm going to talk you through a number of projects, including the one Victoria's mentioned, But before I do so, just a bit about Hawkins Brown, given you're in our home. We're a practice of about 250 architects, based mostly in Farringdon, so this is our kind of central HQ, but we do have studios all over, and we work across most sectors. So as Victoria said, I help lead the education and research sector, but we do workplace, residential infrastructure. And I think what I really enjoy about that is it means that we can dip into lots of different specialisms, and we're constantly learning, and we've got kind of a really rich pool of projects. We have lots of specialisms in the practice, and some of those will be particularly relevant tonight. So we have big urban design and master planning team, principally architects, but also have interior design. And we're always trying to put research into our projects. So trying to think proactively about the future. Can we do things better? Can we create better spaces? A lot of what we've talked about tonight, kind of what do we do with that as architects, as people responsible for shaping the built environment? There's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. So I'm going to talk about 3 examples of how we have worked with young people on a number of projects, and these kind of vary through the life of the project. So firstly, Cambridge Children's Hospital. It's a project that's still currently on the drawing board. We're about to appoint a main contractor, so kind of early stages. Central Foundation Boys School, which is a project that completed 2 years ago, but it's something that we worked on for over a decade, which I guess as architects is really unusual. And here we'll look at the type of engagement you can do while projects are being built. So how do you keep that momentum up and keep people engaged through that delivery process? And then finally, St Mary's. This is a pilot project for the Department of Education, and had really interesting and quite innovative ways, I think, of engaging with young people after a project is complete, going back to make sure that the building in its occupied state does everything that we promised. So firstly, Cambridge Children's. It's a new hospital which will provide an integrated model of care, and what that means is treating young people without distinction between physical or mental health. It's something that's just not done in the UK. It's done very rarely globally. So for example, a young child would go to Cambridge Children's with a broken arm or anorexia, and they'd be treated in the same place by the same doctors. They don't need to go to a specialist unit. They don't need to be kind of shipped off somewhere else. So it's a really long overdue shift in how we think about healthcare. And actually, Cambridge Children's will treat young people for the whole of east of England, and it's the only region currently without a dedicated children's hospital. There are lots of kind of important needs that this project is addressing. So often at the start of projects, we get briefs which talk about the importance of engaging with young people, but rarely do we get this commitment kind of front and centre when we start a project. So when we were tendering for this, we had 3 rounds of interviews. And in our second interview round, we turned up to a panel made entirely of children and young people. So 20 young children who'd come up with their own questions to test us, test how we'd work together, test how we'd work with them. There was an artist facilitator on the panel. And I have to say, in my 15 years at Hawkins Brown, I've never encountered anything like it. And I'm sure I probably won't again. So some of the tasks they got us to do was to take a sheet of paper behind your back and to tear it into the shape of a giraffe. You can see our attempts there. Sounds really simple, actually very, very difficult. Or to draw our dream hospital in 2 minutes while they shouted things at us like a giant horse and a book that becomes a roof. So kind of completely took us off guard. We were bidding for this huge project, very serious, and then we got kind of shipped into this world, which was amazing. So in the kind of pressurized interview situation, you can imagine you're probably not your most creative, and that was the sketch of our dream hospital. So after the interview, we went away and we did this drawing to kind of thank the young people for their energy and enthusiasm, but also make sure we didn't forget the lessons, the kind of passion they brought, and the things that they asked us to make sure that we integrated into the project. And some of the requests that they mentioned during that process were really insightful. So don't treat my illness, treat me. And others were important reminders that the building was for children and to be designed with children. So a giant horse, a slide, biggest book in the world, and this was to hold up the roof. So kind of really kind of fun things. Obviously some of it we can do, but actually you wanted to keep hold of that spirit and not forget all the joy and the energy that had triggered it. We were successful, thankfully, and once we were appointed, we then set up 3 sets of groups to work with the children and young people through the course of the project. I should say that Cambridge Children will serve children from kind of newborn up until they're 19. So we had a under 14s group, we had a young persons group for 14 to 25-year-olds, because at the moment the reach is a bit longer, and then we had a separate group for parents and carers. And we met with them every Tuesday evening for about 6 months to kind of go through different topics that we had scheduled and planned, and to get the input of all the different groups. And this is little Marley here, so he made a model in one of our sessions of his dream hospital, which you can see obviously fully equipped with a basketball hoop. But the kids were very vocal about what they wanted. They wanted colour everywhere. They wanted places to be a family, places for their siblings to feel comfortable, for mum and dad not to feel stressed. They didn't care that they were in hospital because of a kind of serious illness. They wanted to make sure their loved ones weren't feeling that pressure, access to outdoors. So it was a really fun and insightful process. So we worked with the children and young people to develop a number of design principles that you can see some examples here. So the need for homely spaces in a hospital, what playfulness meant to different age groups, and the difference between healing and healthcare, for example. And while most hospitals, as you can imagine, are big complex machines, they need to meet really stringent standards. We wanted to try and carve out spaces that didn't feel like a typical hospital, spaces that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And so that space in green there is what we called the integration hub, and this is what it looks like. So a really generous play and gathering space right in the middle of the building, spaces to get away from the day-to-day pressures of being in the hospital, with individual kind of activity rooms. You can see in this zigzag here, these are all kind of individual nooks and crannies, so a rocket room or a teenage chill out space. And importantly, all of the circulation for the building wraps around this central space. So you go to any other hospital, you get lost in long dark corridors, you don't know where you are, it's quite a stressful situation. So here we wanted to make sure that you could always see the outside, you could always see the time of day, you could see the season, the passage of time. It's a kind of your moment to get a bit of control back. We've heard a bit about how disarming that can be when you don't have control, but if you're in a highly pressurized place like a hospital, having control over something, anything, is really important. And we did lots of engagement with the region. So went to Luton Carnival for a day. Luton's a kind of very hard cohort to access, highly deprived, but actually it's not just children in Cambridge that we're serving, it is also children in Luton. So we wanted to make sure their voices were heard. We went to careers fests, we hosted events in our studio, and then we also went to a thing called Rare Fest, which is an event hosted by a charity which looks after children with rare diseases. So again, trying to tap into these kind of cohorts that are really hard to get the quiet voices out of often on projects. And over the course of the whole project, we worked with a number of different artists, and they joined us in all our consultation sessions. And part of that was to make sure that we had a visual record of the discussions. So not all our children can easily communicate their ideas or how they feel about things. So we wanted to find tools which empowered them to contribute to the process just as much as we or their adults or their parents could. And over the course of the project, we engaged a number of artists. So this was Beatrice, you can see on the next slide, Merlin and Harold and Chris. They all had their own tools and styles and graphic kind of approaches to capturing the discussions. And what it's given us is a really rich record of and an honest record of the brief that the children have given us, so that once we get to the next stages, we can go back and measure. What did they say about smell? Did we make sure it doesn't smell like a hospital? Or what were their views on daylight and how we organise windows? Okay, so Centre Foundation Boys School. This is more a project to think about how we engage during the course of a project. It's one we started back in 2012, so very old for us, but it's only just completed. Project's actually just down the road, Old Street Roundabout. Just behind those big curvy sale buildings, there's a secondary school nestled in the buildings, which you would never know ordinarily. The school has been on that site since the late 1800s, and over the subsequent 150 years, additional buildings were added to the school stock. So you can see the original school building and some of the buildings that they acquired within their kind of current red line. Things like a technical college, which became the first county court, and a tabernacle and Sunday school annex. So really unusual assets for a secondary school. I should say it's kind of comprehensive, non-selective, all-boys school. And when we started back in 2012, this is what we encountered. So the buildings set around the central courtyard, often compared to a prison yard, which is quite hard to argue with, quite a dominating, intimidating space. And this is that central space now, once the project is completed. In this view, you're actually stood on top of a new sports hall, which is buried in the middle of the courtyard. To your left here, you can just about see clipped off the image is the Sunday school annex and chapel, which is turned into a creative arts centre. Then you're looking at a new science building and the school's refurbished humanities building. Project was delivered over a number of phases, so because the site's so tight and constrained, we couldn't do all of the works in one go. So a number of phases working from east to west, and unusually, I guess, the school was kept live and fully operational through all of the construction work. So given the amount of students and how tight all the residential streets, etc., are, was a pretty big feat and something to consider from the design. And lots of things in the building, so I won't go through it in detail. New science labs, bridge links that were kind of weaving old and new. This is the chapel space, which is now a creative arts centre, sports hall, refurbished classrooms, etc. For us, one of the really unique things about the project was working with a school over such a long period. It doesn't always take us 10, 13 years to deliver a school, I promise. But we were fortunate that we had key members of our team from start to finish of the project working on it, and the school reciprocated. So the head teacher was consistent, deputy head was consistent, head of finance. So through that very long duration, we're able to build really strong relationships. And occasionally they'd ask us to do one of these. I think I did 3 of these during that time, which is a whole school assembly to 1,200 very restless secondary school boys, trying to explain to them what was happening, when and where. And then we did lots of this. So we took them behind the hoardings to show them the big hole in the ground, which would become their sports hall. We had them in the studio to do work experience with us. We ended up employing one of the students as an apprentice and was training through with us. So really nice way to kind of get them fully embedded in how we work and make sure that actually the things that we were talking to them about, they could see why we've made certain decisions and how we could feed that into the design process. Fabio was just walking down the stairs. He worked on this with me for many years. And there's a really brilliant video of some of the boys seeing this sports hall for the first time. So a peek behind all of the disruption and what they'd worked hard to allow us to build. And some of their insights were fascinating. So we interviewed one of the boys up here and we said, what do you think of the sports hall? And he said, yeah, it's okay. We're like, okay, great. It's only taken us 10 years. We said, well, what do you think of the colour? And he said, yeah, I don't love the colour, to be honest. And we're like, okay, well, what's your favourite colour? And he thought really seriously for a few minutes and then he said green. And we were just the irony that he was stood in front of this 500 metre squared green room, and that was his favourite colour, but he didn't love green in this instance. So it was fascinating, and we really loved it, and kind of getting their insights and taking them behind the scenes where we could. We've also been working with the school on a research project recently. I said at the start we tried to put research into all our projects, and this is something we began just after COVID. Essentially, we wanted to understand if spaces like these were inspiring or intimidating for the next generation. So as kids transition from places like Central Foundation to university, what do they want in their built environment? And are we making the right decisions as we design buildings in universities? So we wanted to kind of understand more about education inequality. It's obviously hugely documented in the UK. There are attainment gaps, there's dropout rates, the kind of experience of young people in education, higher education particularly, are not kind of uniform. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't, as designers, often doing these buildings, that we weren't compounding the issue with either the way we were engaging with young people or actually what we were designing for them. And so actually, ironically, we did a lot of things that Julia said we shouldn't do or are limited. We did a survey to 1,100 students across the country, first-year students, and we did lots of focus groups. It's obviously a really sensitive topic, but we wanted to try and kind of get comfortable being a bit uncomfortable with the topic, and to make sure that we were taking our responsibility, shaping the built environment seriously, and really trying to kind of push this as far as we could. So if anyone's interested, I'm very happy to talk about that, but it's a talk for a whole other evening. And then finally, last few minutes to talk about St Mary's Catholic Academy. It's UK's first purpose-built biophilic primary school. Essentially, as you can see here, a series of kind of pavilion classroom blocks connected by walkways and external space. It was a pilot project by the DFE, and it was really to challenge the way that we support student wellbeing through the way we design buildings. I think for me, one of the most interesting things about the project has been the post-occupancy evaluation. Often POEs are focused on things like building services. Is the plant working efficiently? Do the spaces overheat? What do the energy bills look like? Really kind of nuts and bolts of has the project delivered. But here, a PhD student from the University of Derby worked with pupils to get under the skin of what they liked and didn't like about their new school. So once it was occupied, once they were settled in, and they got to know the spaces. So they were asked to do things like take photos of the favourite things in their classrooms or places they're most likely to go at break time, mark out spaces they felt most and least comfortable, and they did this by the different age groups. Sounds really, really simple, but this type of analysis you just don't often see when you talk about POE or post-occupancy evaluation. As I said, it's kind of very technical response to a brief, but you never go back and you say to the young people, did you like that canopy? Like, does it work? Why don't you use it? So that's it from me. Talked a bit about engagement you do at the very start of a project, like Cambridge Children's, how you can keep young people informed through a very long project, and then a really great piece of research from the University of Derby. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So thanks very much, everybody. It's kind of really, I've got lots of notes and questions here, but I want to sort of open it up. I think just going to the last one, recognise it was 12 years and things. If it had been a shorter, would you have felt you've been able to engage with the school boys more, because what you're saying is about the teacher and the head teacher and things? Do you think that would have given you a different view on it, or would you feel you got that from the results you got? So let me just put that on.
I think it's a good question. So we did also do engagement through the whole project in the way you do. So we met with students and year reps as we were designing it. I guess I kind of pulled out the stuff we did during and after, because that was what was particularly special, and that's what the long relationship afforded us, that we could actually pull some strings and get access to students in ways that on projects you often can't do. And then some of those lessons we've used on projects which are kind of much faster paced programs, so we still get them into the studio. We do some of the stuff that we did on a hospital with school students or with other projects. So because we can dip into what we learned across lots of different types of projects, if it works well, then we'll use it if we're talking about a train station or a residential building or a school or a hospital.
Yeah. Okay. And the one thing just with, I think it was yours, I'm going really brain hurting here, was, yes, it was about when you showed about the different interests. It was interesting that these were under fives, but transport, the boys, and the housing was girls, and green spaces were girls. And it was just extraordinary to see that. So did you feel that just comes out, or do you think they've sort of been learning that in a way through their parents? I mean, it was quite strong, I thought, there.
I haven't thought about that in terms around learning from parents. But then when Julia talked about unlearning, I was right, actually we might need to look a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
We have parents' visions for their cities and how child-friendly they think they are. In another study, where we didn't have the parent backgrounds and their own backgrounds, some of the children clearly showed where we thought actually there is connections between what parents talk about and how that impacts what children then talk about. So, for example, buses in Dunedin are not very often used by families, and it's more kind of the last resort for people who can't support it. And so we had one child talking about it, said, if you haven't been diligent with your money, you have to use the bus. And just these kind of negative connotation coming through. We haven't seen that so much in that data set yet.
Thank you. And just so last with the sort of unlearning, learning, what have you unlearned yourself?
God.
In a précis, Julia.
Yeah. This could go on for a while. I think it. I've always thought of myself as kind of like, yeah, quite go-getter, right? And I think something, just speaking to so many young people broadly, I guess I've realized, oh, I've actually internalized stuff too. And I never thought I had. I've always thought I've been like quite like, I am who I am. And I think that's really, is that, yeah, I think it kind of, we all have this. And leaning into that. And then coupled with that, I think one of the things is about a position of allowing yourself to make mistakes. I feel like we live in a really mean world where you just cannot make mistakes. And that's one of the things that I feel like that I'm really open to, is like going like, I could be wrong here. And I think it's a really productive place to find yourself in. And this idea of like that we think of ignorance often it's in its pejorative and its negative way. And I actually think sometimes ignorance can be a really powerful place to start. And so I think these are the two things that I've really kind of been leaning into recently.
And
that was short.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm with it. So open to the floor as we have some questions. Yeah. Do you want to just state your name? I think. Sorry, it's just because we're trying to.
Thank you. My name is Alberto. I'm an urban designer, so it's really interesting to have this different focus of our discussion about child-friendly spaces. And I would like to ask you, what's the important for you about intergenerational like links? Because I think the everything has been focused mainly in child or teenagers, but obviously there are many things that are connected with parents or older people, and the importance of child-friendly spaces in that sense. So I would like to know how do you think, why is it important, or what's your opinion about that? Maybe also to bring down the barriers in relation to be able to generate child-friendly spaces. And also, I don't know if in Bogota's project there is a mixture of social infrastructure that is really like having this focus as well, because I really found it interesting, that project. But yeah, that.
I think with the intergenerational work with this current project, it is that it's to put people into conversation together. And I think it's also kind of leaning into difference and saying, actually, can we have two different viewpoints and celebrate that and do it in a constructive way? And so, for example, having a teen talking about a park that an older person's like, I hate that park because you all hang out in it, and so I don't. And so having that as a productive conversation and not as dividing is sort of the intent. But also, I think when a really beautiful thing happens when you get young people together, I don't know if you guys find this, that there's like this amazing energy you get, like co-learning off each other. And so I was just really curious to see what that looked like when you had much like a wider age range. And the other thing, when we were recruiting, we were actually also trying to get people who live in a mixture of housing types. So we have people who are quite vulnerable with people who are very secure. And I think that's been one of the intentions of the recruitment. And a little bit I'm in it. So yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. Oh, with the Bogota project, let's talk about afterwards.
Everybody always talks about. It is extraordinary. If you want to say the Bogota one, and that was coming from the mayor, wasn't it, as well?
Well, this is because Bogota was on the scene because of the former mayor, and then now the new mayor also did this care blocks, but she's also lost her job now, so there's a new person. So we'll see what they come up with. But I think Latin America innovates well.
I guess to come to your intergeneration, I think it's a really good point because you very rarely will get young children walking around cities on their own. They will be with parents or siblings or carers. So you do need to think about the connections between what all of that group needs, because otherwise, yeah, you might kind of, what you do might be too skewed and actually doesn't serve everybody. In the sessions that we did, what I was really taken back was the empathy that each group felt for the others. So we had long debates about colour, for example. You can imagine if you're designing for a 1-year-old to an 18-year-old, how do you choose a colour palette that they will all like? And actually, it wasn't that they chose colours they liked. They were really worried about colours that other groups would like. So the teenagers are like, no, the kids will find that too childish. And the kids were like, no, the teenagers won't enjoy that. So I think part of the session, as you're saying, is about building empathy and for them to understand the challenges. You won't get everything right, and that's okay. But as long as you bring people along that journey with you to kind of understand the kind of conflicting needs that you're going to balance out. And then to Julia's point about kind of ignorance, the hospital is a really good example. When we started on that project, we don't typically do huge healthcare. We went in and we said, we're not healthcare architects, but that's exactly why you need us. So we're going to ask really simple questions. We're going to challenge you at every stage. And we're kind of liberated from all the kind of preconceptions about how you do this sort of thing. So sometimes it can be, as a designer, it's brilliant because you can go in and you can ask kind of, instead of all the silly questions, you can be naive, and that's okay. You know you'll still get to the good outcome, but your process will be probably less linear than if you did this all day, every day. Kind of across our studies, what we really see is that children don't want to be put in playgrounds. They want to be part of society, and they want to feel that they're taken seriously and knowing they belong to something bigger. And so just thinking about just designing playgrounds and places for them to be isn't actually capturing the reality of life. You mentioned that idea around child-friendly cities. I really like the concept, but I really struggle also with the term, because in the work we do, we get a lot of questions around why do you need cities for children? Why don't we need cities for everyone? And so I'm sometimes think maybe the term isn't actually right. And so we were also experimenting to kind of think more around careful cities and how that would look like. And how would that change our conversations from just something that is for one group, even if that concept isn't intended to be, to actually change the language to then get more buy-in and easier buy-in from other groups and see the value of actually creating non-sexist cities, cities that work for everyone. But that also means we need to hear from everyone what that city then looks like.
Well, adults actually said, I don't know, the teenagers are now the teenagers that we feel safe there because we're adults. So there's total conflict going on there. And I think we suggested a new step in the middle, which is now by developer. So you bring those to become the adults as well. So I think having that group at each generation is actually quite a lot from the younger ones. Quicker dealing with that as well. So other questions? I hopefully answered some of them, but very valid.
Thank you. So hello. My name is Matt. So I work at Urban Symbiotics, and thank you for sort of your presentations. It was really interesting, and there's a lot of food for thought. And I know obviously it doesn't apply to everyone in the room, but everyone that's working within the industry, within the built environment sector, how do we show the value of engaging with children and youth to our clients and even to their parents? Sometimes, as I've come across parents raising an eyebrow, why are you asking my child? How do we show that sort of value to the clients? Because ultimately, once the clients get invested, we can do more of sort of engagement with the youth and the children. Did you have any thoughts or ideas on this?
Sure, and I might bring Lizzie in because there's two things I find. One, and maybe if I can, we had a session once, and you were sat there, and it was quite late into the session. You're like, I didn't know that. So from the architect side, you were sat there and you're like, oh, I'm finding out things that I actually didn't know about. That was really helpful. And so I think for you went away going, oh, I've learned stuff that's really important for me to do my job well. And then the second thing that I think, and this could be taken a bit badly, but as in a bit sinister for a developer, but one of the things that I think for anyone who does consultation, you get the same old people kind of coming back. And often they might be singing a tune, and sometimes it's very important stuff, but you're like, oh God, are we going to have this conversation again? I already had it with you last time. And it can actually be really disruptive and not very productive at all. But what we found, and I don't know if you want to talk about it, when we had that consultation event and our 3 young women came, all of a sudden all those tensions just disappeared because they were like, oh, you came up with this, oh, then that's fine. And so from a client side, I think that was actually when W11 started coming on board, because they're like, oh God, this is actually can smooth things through, because there was genuine work. And so that's where I worry about this. This could be used really cynically by developers. But I think so it's that thing of knowledge, the first thing. And then 2 is going, yeah, if you actually work with people, it's just, I think most people react to just change because they're like, it just stresses me out. And all of a sudden, when you have a say and you can see your comments being taken on board, and I'm sure I loved seeing all that work. It made me really jealous of your job. That's all that people want, just to be told and communicated with. And then all of a sudden you can, so I actually think I think along with climate change and inequality, distrust in our political systems is the hugest challenge that we face. And a part of that distrust, us in this room, we play a role in that. And it's about building trust, and actually there is a material benefit to that, because the distrust stops stuff from happening, even things that are in people's interest. They're stopping it because I don't like it and I don't want it. And so, yeah, that was meant to be short and it wasn't. I don't know, but yeah, if you want to say something about that experience.
Yeah, no, having the ambassadors on board at a public consultation was brilliant. Just having people who lived that experience in the estates, because as designers we studied the whole site for months, but we just didn't have that insight the ambassadors had, and having them there and having residents being able to talk to them as well. And we had 3 boards that were their designs, and we were showing how that was following through into our designs, and it was part of the room, part of the connection and the story that we were telling. So that was brilliant, and it's completely eye-opening and different way of doing a normal public kind of consultation for us. So we really found that experience valuable. And then obviously having Julia and Olivia at Social Place involved was fantastic as well, because it gave us, we don't really have time as designers to kind of go into that level of research that Julia and Olivia did for us, and seeing that connection through the mirror board, seeing all of their mapping exercises, bringing all that together, gave us an extra layer of analysis to add in to our designs, and that's really important. There's a huge level of responsibility on me now to kind of bring that through to sites and make sure all of that kind of research and all the ambassador experience comes through, and as well as bring, you know, all of the other voices in as well. So I think the reason why we had the ambassadors on board was because we wanted them to be kind of a vessel for the voices in the estate. And we thought, well, if we can make the ambassadors feel safe, we can hopefully make all the residents feel safe as well. And that was our main aim.
Yes, I was just going to add, Mark. For me, the answer is really simple in that you get better outputs. So better buildings, better spaces, better cities. They're serving their purpose in a way that you couldn't do without that engagement. And then to Lizzie's point about ambassadors, I think there's something like 800 children's in the network on Cambridge Children's, and so we don't need to sell the project anymore. You could ask any one of them, what's the project doing, and they will tell you about the little garden space or the integration hub. They've kind of lived and breathed it, so they've become the kind of the message, and they will help us do all the fundraising and all of that, so they kind of carry that with us. I guess there is an important point though, that often engagement and hiring specialist consultants costs money and it takes time, and so you do need the client's buy-in to give the team that space to do that work and to invest in it. So it's a kind of carrot and stick. If there was more incentive in the planning process, for example, for that engagement to happen in a meaningful way, you can imagine that yes, it wouldn't be a nice to have where teams do it because they love it. There's kind of incentive for developers.
And I would say it's interesting, and not a nice to have. I mean, that's what I often say. The hashtag is not a nice to have; it's a must have, and it's just changing that at the moment. And we all recognise there is that barrier. This sort of it's still nice to have, but you're getting there further forward. But I think it's only pushing. And I have to say, one of the reasons we do the awards is to open this up to show the value of working engagement with young children, young people. And we did the last awards, we actually introduced the developer award, where before we had local authority, because local authority and procurement is you know where the planning is. So if they stand up for it, it's more likely to go in, and the client will have to do something about it. The question is, what level and how well do you do it? So the awards is trying to show good practice within that, to give examples to others, but actually to show to developers, actually, this is good business as well. You know, they're paying the money for it, so it is good value. Against that, of course, we know that they don't pay a lot in it. It's still a difficult one below that. But I think we're moving towards the more positive, and I think we wouldn't have been able to do these awards 5 years ago with any of the developers coming in or the local authorities. Actually, we would have been talking to ourselves, which is great, but you know, we love that, having the community. But really what we want is to change. We want that step change, and so to bring those in. The other thing, which is slightly cynical, but sometimes you think, well, how do I open this door? If you work with children, young people, it's a positive feel, and they are positive. So if you ask them a question, they'll give a positive. You give an adult, it's, oh, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. So it's good business to actually work with children and young people, and you get a better percentage return. Are they happy with my development? So you can say it's cynical, but then the developer recognizes that actually it has some value. So it's a stepping stone. It's a door, opening a door sometimes to do that. So though we can feel cynical about them using kids and young people because we get the positive, at the same time they're starting to recognize, but actually, yes, we are getting more out of this. Actually, it's a really good thing. So I think we're in the step by step, but we have I would say we've definitely moved on in the last 4 or 5 years about this, but there's more work to be done. Any other questions? There's another one.
Is this too loud? No. Julia, not to put you on the spot, it's a question for everyone, but it came to my mind when you were presenting, because your presentation had specific engagements with women. And I'm wondering if any of you used any of the tools like body mapping or diversity, the UN Habitat Toolkit, in your engagements? Because these are things that I read about and they, in theory, sound interesting, but I don't know how applicable they are. I did not get a chance to try them yet. Thank you.
I think with the like, I really like the. I mean, maybe I can broaden it out, and I think to something we all like. The Sustainable Development Goals are brilliant, like in theory, and it's just the challenges in practice. And I think broadly with actualizing any right, it's quite easy to have rights. You know, I think it's the actualization of those rights into practice, which is the real challenge. And I think sometimes the role of the UN is to state these things as rights. And then it's not necessarily the role of the UN to actualize those things on the ground. And so I think I know about that work and it's nice to look at it, but we have, and I think we were talking about mapping, like, so you come from, I know this from the chat we were before about background in geography, I come from a background in architecture. And for me, in my practice, it's more useful to actualize things through the tools that I feel really comfortable with. And so things like mapping, which is, but I think they are in conversation. And so I think it's just it's a strategic level thing and then coming down. And you see that in planning broadly. I mean, so like, you know, the GLA, they're actually not allowed to have like scaled drawings in their reports. So it sits at a level, but then that level sets the playing field. And then you decide how you play the game. So I think don't be disheartened by these sort of, I don't know, reports that might seem very strategic, because they're setting the rules for the game. And then it's up to you to find out how I'm going to play it and what's the actual like gritty stuff going to look like. And yeah, that's sort of how I sort of feel about it. Sorry, I hope that's a good enough answer.
Thank you. I think it's sort of amount of time. So I'd like to just draw it to a close. If there are any questions afterwards, want to speak or talk to individuals, obviously email us. If you have another project, let us know. Think about the awards, or even if you don't have it, something you know of another organization or company or whatever. Because the more we have case studies to show this value, the more we can show it to others to actually get the step change. So please help us as well. We're trying to do our bit, but just to thank all the speakers this evening is really, really interesting, informative, and thank you very much for your time as well. And thank you, audience.